Hello, this is Rob Hirschfeld, and welcome to another Digital Rebar training. This one is about adding dynamic Ansible roles to your deployment. It's a follow-on to the one where we created script roles dynamically, and you could run bash scripts. So check that one out. This will cover some of that same material, so you don't have to see that one first. But the idea here is that I've got a deployment. I've built Kubernetes one I've been testing against. I have this demo for the training. It's just a one-node Kubernetes deployment. It's pretty vanilla from that perspective. And what I want to be able to do is add some Ansible roles into this work. So I'm playing a little bit. I want to add a new capability, and I don't want to have to write a whole workload file. I just want to add something, right? Or you could do something ad hoc where you have some Ansible and you need to play with it. There's a lot of Ansible capabilities in Digital Rebar. This is just going to skim the surface, but it'll help you see a little bit about how things are structured. And we're going to do this out of a gist that I have. The first one's going to be pretty vanilla, and then the next one will show you actually some Kubernetes attribute injection. So what I'm going to do is here's my role, here's my workloads. I'm going to add one here. I've been playing around a little bit. So this is a generic. This is what you get if you just added a script. Show you some attributes. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this Ansible example. It's got a ton of stuff in it. We'll explain it a little bit. In here, make this bigger, yay. And so what you've got here, we're going to call this dhold. I've been playing a little bit. So this is going to be called a workload called dhold. It's just an Ansible holder. It's an API uploaded, so it's not saved. Remember that, it's just in the database. So you need to do that. And then the names have to be unique. So I have to create a new bar clamp, create a new role. Otherwise, I'll be replacing things. So in this case, here's the dereference is the name. It is an Ansible playbook. It's going to use the icon for spell check. Implicit just means it's going to be added automatically. It's going to require rebar installed node. So I have to reach the installed part before this runs. By picking different requires, you could actually run in the discovery image. You could wait until after Kubernetes installed. I'll show that example next. And in this case, the body is going to give me a debug message, and then it's going to include the debug YAML file. And the debug, so this body is the main task. The next one, there's another section. This body is debug variables, and it's going to show me hints and rebar wall, which are some hints you get for free, or variables you get for free. I'll show you what those look like. And it's going to create the debug file in the tasks directory. So you can specify these by default, they're main and tasks. And then there's a whole bunch of details in here that we have to add because this is generic code. We're just writing in the metadata. We're just pulling the data out of the role instead of doing it from a file. So in this case, I'm just saying use the current playbook file on the current path. And then I have to map rebar's roles to Ansible roles. So they don't have to be the same name. In this case, it's convenient, so I'm leaving it that way. And I have to tell it where the data is. So I'm saying run it on the node. You can do a whole deployment scope if you want to run a big playbook on multiple nodes and then map milestones to roles. Totally doable. And my playbook source path here is dereference, and it's saying create it out of the metadata. So it's going to take this data, create the files, and do it. And it'll recreate them every time. That allows you to do fast iterations. And there's another video where I show how you edit files in place in a playbook, and then you can rerun them really fast. This is an even faster model because then I don't have to store files anywhere, check things in, or anything like that. I don't have to restart the system. So I'm going to have a second playbook. So this one's called dereference. This dhold is a role that matches the name of the workload. It's a milestone, a no-op role. And it's going to require dereference. So that allows me to pull in a no-op and then bring in the reference. So I'm going to update here. It worked. I get an updated bar clamp. If I scroll all the way down, here's dhold, the one I just added, and here's the two roles, dereference and dhold. So if I look at this workload, you can see this is the same data that I added, and I can go in and I can edit it and make some changes. If I go into the roles, what you'll see is here's the same information I had, a little bit easier to edit, and then this is the information I had. And then once again, you can see it just for reference. And you'll notice it adds some tracking stuff because the UX needs some additional data in the meta files. So basically, I've added this role that runs these Ansible steps. I need to add it into my deployment, so I'm going to do that in demo. This doesn't make it show up. What I actually have to do is it just added a deployment role into the system. So you're not going to see that new role anywhere. What I have to do to make that attach is I have to go into proposed mode, which allows me to edit a deployment, and then I can bind my new role. So way down here it says dereference. It doesn't have all the other ones I've added, just this one. And here I can say this node gets this role, and you'll see it pops up into the deployment. That way, if I had a 10 node deployment, I could just pick which nodes I wanted to bond it to. If I'd picked the no-op role, dehold, then that would also bring in dereference because they have a relationship, a requires relationship. All right, so enough talking. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go ahead and commit this, which means the system's going to start executing. So the dereference here is going to just start running. And in this case, it worked. And what it did was it actually ran my playbook. So here's my debug reference, debug variables playbook, right? Because I did the include. So I had dereference, I called debug. That's the top title, and then here is the variables. And then because of the variables that are already declared in the system, there's a ton of information you can mine just using normal variables. That's why I wanted to demonstrate this about the system. And the nice thing about this is there's a lot of really crisp details that we collect that you can then leverage without having to do an expensive Ansible inventory, because we've already collected all this from the discovery. In some cases, there's more information than you would otherwise get, especially because you can now start getting cluster information, and I'll show that next. And if I wanted to edit this and make some changes here, I could just go in. I can just go in and say, you know what, I don't need to include my debug variables, and I'm going to call this vehicle now. Save it. And when I rerun it over here, you'll get that action. And if there's bugs or something like that, you'll get your normal outputs, and you'll see it says vehicle. It didn't do all the other stuff. And what's really fun with this is this is working great. I can add an error in here, which will help illustrate something. So if I just put in some garbage characters that won't parse correctly, when I retry this, we'll get a nice error. Maybe nice is the wrong word for an error, but we'll get an intended error. And in this case, it's going to give you a lot of information about what's going on behind the scenes. So it's actually showing us where we're running that play. So var cache, so this is on my API server, and it's telling me where, it's telling me what inventory I used, it's telling me exactly where the inventory file is, and it's telling me what extra variables there are, which is what I want to show you. So if I take this extra variables file and come into my system and just exec into my API server. So right now I'm in the API server's context, which is where Ansible's running from. And if I cat this inventory file, and I'm going to be sneaky, I'm going to move it, I'm going to cat it to JQ, which is going to parse it in a pretty way. This is showing me all of the variables, all the data that I have available. So you don't have to sort of guess. You can actually jump in really quickly and see this. And if you want to be super sneaky, you don't even have to enter in the container. You can actually just cat the file, JQ. I love Docker like this. And boom, I have it. I didn't even have to leave my context and log into the container. I can just execute the command in the container. So super awesome. I can pull out all that Ansible data that I want and see it. And since it's generated uniquely each time, you can actually go back and look at some of your history and things like that. So tons of great data. It makes it super easy to troubleshoot what's going on. I should probably fix this before I go to my next step. So let me fix that. Yay. All right. And then I can just rerun it from here and not have to worry. So that's pretty cool. What I'd like to do is say, wow, hey, that's really cool, but I'm trying to extend my Kubernetes deployment. So in this case, we're going to go and do a Kubernetes role, same process, workloads, add in here, and I'm going to have to change its name. So here's a Kubernetes demo. I'll call it Kubernetes demo 2. So I'm going to have to make the same types of changes. Kubernetes demo 2 to the role. Playbook, spell check, you can use any icons you want. In this case, it's going to require the Kubernetes master because I want it to only use the master, and it's already coded to say, hey, I want you to give me some attributes from the cluster. I want the cluster name and I want the cluster service IPs. So that way I could actually do a role that takes those things into account. And there's a ton of information. I'll show you exactly where that comes from. And in this case, I have my roles data, my variable, K8s, that's going to bring in both of these variables. I'll show you why. I got to spell Ansible correctly. That's embarrassing. And let's see. So all this, K8's master, all that looks good, except I still have to keep fixing my name here. Demo 2, K8's demo 2. Role names do have to be unique. So the difference with this is I'm adding wants attributes. I'm changing the requires. Otherwise, it's basically the same thing as what I just showed you. See if this updates correctly. It did. So I can jump down in here, K8's demo 2, add it to my Kubernetes deployment, which is demo here. Cool, this is excellent. And let's jump up to that deployment and see what's going on. So same rules, got to come in, propose, attach. And you could automate a lot of this stuff with the CLI if you wanted. I'm trying to go through it sort of methodically so you can see it. Same process over and over again. In this case, whoops, oh, there you go. Just took a second to update. So what happens is, here is my header, and then in this case, the K8's variable has cluster name, Kubernetes, and it has the cluster service IPs here, and then it shows me, so there's only one machine in it, so the cluster service IP is just that one machine, and then it actually shows me the master with these addresses, the host names with these. So I could actually use this information to actually figure out all of the admin servers in my Kubernetes cluster, and if they change, it's going to subscribe me to updates and rerun this role. So every time the information I have wants attributes for, every time that changes, it's going to come in. So actually we should be able to see this. Every time I extend a training like this, I end up eating crow. But the idea here is that in my matrix, I could go in and change. I could change the name of my cluster if it was actually showing me my Kubernetes services. I don't know why it's not. We introduced a bug in a recent version. But I could change the name of the cluster service, and that would then propagate to change all of the consumers of the cluster name, which is quite a number of people. I promised to show you how you can figure out where those things are and what they are. So if you go under Advanced, you'll see attributes. There's a ton of Kubernetes attributes. There's a ton of attributes in general. Roles can define them. That's a little bit more complex than what this lesson is. But so here is the attribute I'm asking for, and then this is how it's mapped into. So if I want to get that out of Ansible, I can just say Kubernetes master network, and it'll give me that exact thing. If I start with just Kubernetes, it's going to treat it like a JSON blob, and I'll get all of the Kubernetes things. What's really important to me is that when I did this, you didn't just get all of the variables. So part of the whole design pattern for Rebar is that you don't get accidental variables included. So you only get the variables that you've asked for. And that allows us to have a lot more control over who's consuming what and when, and if there's a dependency, you can be aware of it because all that stuff is mapped out. Um, really, really much more easy to maintain a system like that because it's explicit than if you had buried a variable into a playbook and then somebody changed how that variable is used upstream. And if you actually look at our attributes, they can be mapped down to specific regexes and types and things like that. So we can be very tight about, I have this variable, it's injected here, it's consumed there, and it must follow the schema. So design here is to be safe because that's how you scale and you do collaborative development. So overall, huge capability with this. I can now add a role, do Ansible work, I can do test, rapid cycles, I can change things on one node at a time, test, test, test until I get it right. And then once you get it right, you can take this this role and just grab it right out of the, sorry, here's my, jump over here. I can just grab it right out of here, convert it to YAML, and I now have a role to add into my into a workload that I've added. Or you can just include it like this and have somebody upload a file right into Digital Rebar in a running Digital Rebar, and they've now added a capability wasn't there before. I hope this was helpful. I'm really excited about this functionality because I think it brings together a lot of things about Digital Rebar that you can use in day-to-day operations in a very safe and repeatable way. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Rob Hirschfeld out.